I'm here today with Deb Oxley from the Employee Ownership Association. Say hello, Deb.
Morning, Simon.
Good morning. And we are going to be talking about how employee ownership can help motivate your team and ultimately make your business more efficient and more profitable. I can't wait to get started. This morning, I'm going to introduce to you a young lady that I first spoke to 4 years ago, I think it was, Deb Oxley, who is CEO. Deb, how do you describe, what's your position?
Chief Executive.
Chief Executive of the Employee Ownership Association. And at that point, I was already very interested in employee ownership, and having had a conversation with Deb over the space of 45 minutes, it really fired me up. And ultimately, I know that's a goal. We've already started the journey with Greenstones, but that is ultimately my goal with Greenstones. And we've also helped customers transition from director shareholder ownership into employee ownership as well. So I find this a fascinating subject. As always, if you have any questions as we go along, please pop them in the Q&A box. It's the Q&A, it's the little symbols to the right of the raised hand function on your Zoom. Pop them in there and I will gladly ask Deb as we go through. As I always say, we like stupid questions. Stupid questions are the easy ones to answer. So if you feel it's a little bit stupid, then please feel free to ask it. I bet there's other people in the room that would also like to know the answer to that. And of course, we will also answer the more difficult ones as well. So without further ado, Deb, I will shut up and allow you to share the great information that you're going to share.
Thank you very much. Let me just turn my screen on and you should be able to see it. Young lady, what a lovely thing to say to me on a Tuesday morning, Simon. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. Thanks to Simon for the opportunity to join you today. And as it said on the invite, how can employee ownership help you and your business and your clients, particularly those that might be considering the future of their business? So a little bit about me to start with. The Employee Ownership Association, we're a membership organisation for the sector within the UK. So that's that growing sector of businesses that are either exploring employee ownership or those that are already employee owned and are wanting to make the most of their employee ownership status. As an organisation, we believe that business is better when all employees have a stake and a say in their employment. And hopefully over the next half an hour or so, I'll be able to explain why we think that. And we have a really clear purpose, and our purpose is to unlock the potential of people, businesses, and the economy in the UK through employee ownership. The organisation is a not-for-profit membership organisation. We've got about 480 members, that's corporate businesses. There's a team of 9 of us. We have a board who are made up of some of our member organisations and a membership council who help us develop our membership services. So we're really about campaigning for more employee ownership, celebrating employee ownership, and connecting our members together. So let's talk about the next half an hour or so. So my plan is to cover 3 things. So first of all, to look at employee ownership in 2021. So what does it look like? How big is it? Who's doing it? Then also to look at what's been driving the recent growth of employee ownership in the UK, which you may or may not know a little bit about. And then finally, to look at what are the opportunities for more employee ownership in the UK. So I'm going to start with a sort of picture of what employee ownership is and how big it is in the UK. This is a slide that we've used quite often just to sort of give a scale of what employee ownership is. So it's worth, we estimate, around and about 30 billion annually to the UK economy, which, dependent on which numbers you're reading, can anywhere between about 3 to 4% of GDP. So it's not huge, but it's also not unsubstantial. And it is, as you're going to find out, growing at pace. It's also present around the whole of the UK. This is a heat map of our membership, but to be fair, it's from a few years ago. But what you can see is unexpectedly, employee ownership is growing in major conurbations. So where there are lots of businesses, you'll find a growing amount of employee-owned businesses. And in terms of who's doing it, I've just pulled out a few of our members' names here, and you'll see Greenstones at the top. But what you'll also see is some names that you do recognise and some names that you probably don't recognise. So, of course, everybody knows the John Lewis Partnership, but employee ownership is so much more than just the John Lewis Partnership. There are some other large names on there as well. So you'll see Arup, you'll see Mott MacDonald. Some of you may know they're global engineering businesses, 11 to 15,000 people in those businesses. Obviously, you'll recognise Lush. They've got a minority employee ownership stake and they're a global business. But then you'll also see some names that you probably don't recognise, very strong UK independently owned, privately owned businesses like Parfits, which is a wholesale distribution business in the Northwest, or Alpha Travel, which is a nationwide travel business with hotels and coaches, or Gripple, which is a Yorkshire-based manufacturing business that also operates across the world, or Childbase, which is as it sounds, a nursery business operating about 60 or 70 nurseries. So really, the sector is entirely diverse, with lots of different businesses, all really sharing some of the same traits, which we'll come to later on, but covering every single sector of the economy. I often say I need a challenge from somebody to ask me, is there a sector of the economy where employee ownership isn't present? Because I think now we've got every sector of the economy. So if we look at scale in a bit more detail, we're estimating at the moment that there are about 200,000 people employed in employee-owned businesses. And you can see there that the latest figure says 470 employee-owned businesses. We actually think it's well beyond that now. This data comes from last July or last June. We're actually thinking it might be as high as 600 now because the growth has been phenomenal over the last 18 months. But you can see that even in 2019, the growth was coming at pace. And many of those conversions into employee ownership, which there's a clue about why it's happening, have actually happened in the last few years. And they've been particularly driven by something called the Employee Ownership Trust, which I'm going to come back to, which you may be familiar with anyway, but I'm going to come back to a little bit later in this presentation. In terms of the sectors, you've already seen some slides which gave some brand names, but I quite like this slide. It gives a bit of a breakdown of the top 5 sectors since 2017. And what you can see there is professional service companies are the dominant sector. Now that's not surprising because these are businesses where their people are their real assets. So they don't have products necessarily. What they have is people and their talent and their innovation and their brains. So actually what you find is this is a very, very attractive model for professional service companies. But actually manufacturing is also a secondary sector. Information and communication, I would probably put into the professional services sector. So it just strengthens that sector. Construction's really interesting because we've had a number of construction businesses become employee owned in the last few months actually. And from a geographic perspective, you can see here that again, as I said earlier, London, as you might expect, is dominant, but Scotland's interesting. So the reason Scotland's got quite a high number of employee-owned businesses is because Scottish government has put direct support into growing that bit of the economy, particularly because it is interested in preserving jobs in Scotland, which again alludes to another benefit of employee ownership, which is about job preservation. Since about 2014, we've been tracking something called the top 50 employee-owned businesses. And as it sounds, it's a register of the biggest employee-owned businesses in the UK. And year on year, we've been able to track the success of those businesses. So I just want to focus on a little bit of the data here because it's a good proxy for what we're seeing across the rest of the sector. So what you can see on this table is a summary since 2014 of the combined sales of those top 50, the total number of employees, which is up to about 178,000 as of last year, and the smallest business in that register or that index. So back in 2014, the smallest business in the top 50 had 143 employees. Move forward to last year, and the smallest one had 378. So it's quite an interesting figure because it shows you how the sector is becoming much more attractive to larger businesses. However, for the SME sector, which is the dominant sector in the UK, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, the employee ownership model is ideally suited. And in fact, as of last December, the average size of a business that is moving to employee ownership using the EOT model is actually 90 employees. In terms of that top 50, just to show you some of the results which we've been able to track. You can see here last year the productivity levels of these businesses. This is a year-on-year comparison, like-for-like comparison of the businesses that were in the top 50 in 2019 and in 2020. And I think this is quite an important number. 6.9% has been the productivity increase in the top 50 between 2019 and 2020. And if you put that into context, that's in an economy which is at the bottom of the G7 in terms of productivity, and the UK-wide productivity level was less than 1% in the same period. Obviously, you've also got those figures on the combined sales, which again was up 4.3% like for like. That's comparing those that were in the index the previous year with those that were in the index in 2020. And the number of employees was up as well. So the reason that's an important set of numbers for us is because it's a proxy for the wider sector. We don't have data for the wider sector, which is a bit of a challenge for us. The reason we don't have data for the wider sector is because currently the government don't collect comprehensive data on employer businesses. So we have to use desk research and some of the partnerships we have with some brilliant organisations across the UK who help us gather that data. One in particular is called the White Rose Centre for Employee Ownership. So, but I think that one slide gives you a sort of indicative set of measures about, is this a successful part of the economy? And by any account, you'd say that yes, it is, based on what I've just shown you. So let's just dig into some of that in a bit more detail. Productivity is high in these businesses. Why? We would say that productivity is higher because of the impact employee ownership has at an individual level. So it impacts the way individuals feel within the business. It impacts their level of discretional effort. It really impacts on their contributions. And when you get that collectively across a large number of employees, that's when you start to see the impact on the bottom line of each of these businesses. Another key benefit is these businesses are proven to be much more resilient. So we have data about the resilience levels of these businesses that goes back many years, actually back to the previous crash, where Cass Business School did a really interesting piece of research into the performance of businesses before and after 2008's crash. And it showed that these businesses had taken a much more long-term view of the future, were more able to grow back after the crash. And a lot of that has been driven by the fact that they have a different relationship with the employees. So these are businesses where data is shared more willingly and openly with all employees. There are higher levels of employee engagement. There are higher levels of trust between employees and the management teams. And all of that leads itself to businesses that can take decisions in a different way and actually, in times of trouble, can be far more resilient. We're in the process of gathering similar sort of data post-COVID to understand what has happened to these businesses during COVID. But anecdotally, we know already that, and we've heard from many of our members, that there've been much higher levels of trust and engagement and much more resilience being shown by these businesses because they've been able to take different decisions. One thing I just want to point out, however, is that when I paint a picture of this sector, some people challenge me occasionally and say, oh, this is just about socialism, isn't it? It's just spreading everything around everybody within a business. Interestingly, depending on who I speak to, if I'm speaking to people on the left, they'll accuse me of being too much about capitalism. If I'm speaking to people on the right, they'll accuse me of being too much about socialism. I actually think that employee ownership is part of both of those. It's about socialising capital. It's about taking the wealth that's created in businesses and sharing it more widely. And actually, through the way you do that, then creating more wealth in those businesses. For us, it's really important that employee ownership does not become a political football. So we work extensively with all parties to really position employee ownership as being a driver of economic success, regardless of which side of the political divide that you sit on. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a background of where employee ownership is in the UK at the moment. What I want to do now is talk about the growth of employee ownership and the future potential, which I think is really relevant to you, both as business owners yourselves, but also with clients. So I'm going to start with what has been driving the success and the growth of employee ownership over the last few years, and that growth that you've seen in the stats that I was just showing. So the growth has been really inspired by SME businesses and family-owned businesses that are looking at succession. So we know, and you know better than most because of the jobs you do, that businesses tend to reach a certain pathway and their life journey where the owner founders are starting to think about their next step. Many of them thinking about, how do I extract value from this business? I'm now getting to an age where I want to retire. I want to step back and take it a bit easier. And that has been the area where employee ownership has really hit its sweet spot. And recent stats actually show that of the 1.5 million businesses in the UK that are classed as actual SMEs, that's between 1 and 249 employees, around 120,000 of these are firms that are likely to want to manage their transition over the next few years. So this is where owner founders are doing that, thinking about their future. And they do this for many reasons. You know, they do it from an age perspective. They might do it because they're thinking about the next generation of owners. They may do it when they're younger because they're thinking about sustainability of the business. But that succession moment is a really important moment. And of course, what tends to happen is, depending on who they're speaking to as their advisor, they may simply get shown the traditional models of exit, which would be either a trade sale or a management buyout. But we are increasingly finding that employee ownership is becoming a really, really attractive option. Just to bring that to life a little bit, you will have seen, no doubt, in the press that there have been some very high profile transitions to employee ownership. And I've just pulled out the 3 here from 2019 that really caused quite a lot of interest in employee ownership. So those of you who are familiar with Shaun the Sheep, or if you're a bit older like me, Morph, and of course Wallace and Gromit, you'll recognise Aardman Animations as one of the big transitions that happened in 2019. So Aardman was a privately owned UK business created by 2 guys. They had offers to sell that business to some major global businesses, but they refused because they didn't want their independence to be undermined. The whole point of their creativity comes from their independence, and they didn't want to lose that. So they chose the employee ownership route, and particularly the employee ownership trust route. Another firm which some of you might be familiar with is Riverford Organics, based down in the southwest. This is a proud producer of organic foods. Guy set the business up and was absolutely adamant he was not going to sell out, had a very poor view of the sort of venture capitalist marketplace. Didn't think that he wanted to sell to a competitor because he worried about the beliefs and the values of the business disappearing. So he also moved down the employee ownership route. And probably the one that most of you can remember is Richer Sounds. So Julian Richer, the inventor and creator of the Richer Sounds brand and the shops across the country that many of us will be familiar with. Again, he got to a point in his life cycle, which was actually 60. His dad had died at a similar age, and he decided, without children of his own, he needed to work out what he was going to do for the future of the business. So 3 really high profile businesses that all moved to employee ownership. And that in itself has helped the sector grow, because when the media actually end up reporting these types of stories, then we get a lot more interest from owners wanting to inquire whether it'd be right for them. I can see Simon's just popped up on screen.
Yeah, Deb, I'll just because obviously we're a group of accountants, and I just wanted to have a brief thing on the richer sounds thing. So the sub headline of the Times one says, "Move to employee trust creates 3.5 million windfall for its hi-fi chain staff." Now, mentally, as an advisor, I'm going, how does that work? So obviously I understand that moving it across into a trust, that has certain things for Julian, but it doesn't actually. My understanding, just to confirm, is that all of these products, schemes, strategies, whatever language you want to call about it, it's not giving stuff away to staff at all, and there's certainly no, in my experience, no windfall, and definitely no tax-free windfall from there's some tax advantages for the staff, but there's no tax-free windfall for the employees.
No, you're absolutely right. Let me go back to that slide. So what Julian did, and I'm going to explain the employee ownership trust route in a second, but what Julian did was, because there was a capital gains tax benefit for him, he chose voluntarily to give some of that benefit back to the employees. So for those of you that might remember the story, he basically gave everybody in the business £1,000 for every year they had worked there. And that was his returning some of the CGT relief that he received from making this transition work back to the employees. So you can imagine on that day, he was a very, very popular person in the business. He tells a great story because the staff didn't really know anything about it. And he walked into the room and he told them what he was about to do, and then he told them what he was doing for them. And you can imagine there were tears and all sorts as people realised what that meant to them. Some of them had worked for the business for 30 years. And they walked out with £30,000, which they were not expecting. But that's unusual, I have to say.
Yeah, and that was his choice, rather than
absolutely his
the mechanism creating that. Brilliant. Thanks, Deb.
Absolutely his choice. So what is the employee ownership model? Well, first of all, the Employee Ownership Association has a belief that employee ownership means where everybody in the business has the opportunity for a stake, and everybody in the business has an opportunity for a say. And it's really important. That is our distinction and our definition. So it's not employee share ownership, which often is only used for executives. It's very much about providing an opportunity for everybody in the business to have a stake and a say. And there are three very simple ways of doing this, which this diagram is trying to explain. So firstly, on the left-hand side, you've got the indirect form of employee ownership. And that's where you use a trust. And that has been the most popular model in the last few years for the growth of employee ownership. So that's a trust like the John Lewis Trust, or the trust like I've just described at Richer Sounds, where all or a proportion of the equity of the business sits in a trust, the beneficiaries of whom are all of the employees. On the right-hand side, you've got direct ownership, and that's where you can use tax-advantaged all-employee share schemes, again, where everybody in the business has the opportunity to participate in share ownership, either by purchasing shares or sometimes by being gifted shares as well. And then in the middle, there's a hybrid model where you can have a trust and direct shares operating in the same model. So it could be that you've got an EOT, an employee ownership trust, which I'll come on to in a second. You could have a share scheme on the right, say a share incentive plan, a SIP, some of you might be familiar with, or even an EMI, an enterprise management incentive scheme for executives. And together that would be a hybrid model. So it's really flexible. You can build the model around what you or your clients want. So if we now talk about benefits, about why business owners go down this route. So if we look at it, first of all, benefits for the retiring business owners. So we're very much focused now on the succession angle of employee ownership. So one of the first benefits is that it allows an owner to realise financial value in the business. And, I think one of the myths that I've heard people talk about, which is, oh, you can't get the same value with an employee ownership transaction that you would with a trade sale. Well, I'm sorry, but that's rubbish. You can, and many owners do. So I would put that one to bed straight away. Some owners choose not to go to the maximum value because actually what they care about are some of the other benefits that they will get out of this move to employee ownership, but they don't have to sacrifice the value of the business if they don't want to. A second benefit that many of them look for is they want to leave a legacy. So, they've built this business up over many years. It's like their third child. They absolutely don't want to see it be sold out and possibly, the business be broken up. And they are really concerned about the sustainability of the business. And, the preservation of jobs. So for them, a move to employee ownership allows them to secure that as a benefit as well. And for many of them, they know each and every one of their employees by name. They quite often live near those employees. Their families might socialise together. And it matters to them that when they leave this business, they leave it with some certainty for the employees as well. And that's about that long-term business sustainability. It's about preserving the jobs, and it's about preserving the jobs in that place. And also for some, the way that they exit matters. So for many of them, they might think about this succession journey before they have real plans for retirement. So maybe in their late 40s, early 50s, they're thinking within the next 10 years, I'd like to think I've got a route to exit from this business. And of course, if you go down the trade sale route, very often you won't be asked to stay on. And if you do, it's only for 6 months, 12 months possibly. So once you press the button on a trade sale, you're probably going to be out within a year. Whereas this route would allow an owner to exit on their terms and also allow for that really important succession and that handover of the intellectual property, the relationships that might exist between the owner founder and the management team. And of course, we've talked about this, capital gains tax relief is also really important. And the EOT, the Employee Ownership Trust, allows an owner to sell the proceeds of their business without any capital gains tax. So providing that 50.1% or more is transferred, sold into an employee ownership trust, there is no capital gains tax to pay on the proceeds of that sale. Now, I've put that at the bottom of the list. Some of you might think, well, that should have been at the top. But what we find is because of the 50.1%, this does not attract business owners who are just looking to maximise their tax position. It definitely attracts business owners who are interested in the long-term future of the business that they've created. And the capital gains tax relief is just the icing on the cake. So from an owner's perspective, what we've got here is long-term sustainability and employment for the business. For the employees, we've got long-term sustainability. Employees also have the opportunity to have their voices heard because alongside a trust structure is very often you'll see employees appointed as trustees to that trust. And anyway, the culture of employee ownership is one where you will see more formal mechanisms of hearing employee voice. It's actually part of why employee-owned businesses are so successful, because they listen to their employees and they take on board their ideas. For employees as well, there is a financial benefit because in addition to the capital gains tax relief that the owner can attract on the proceeds of the sale, annually, there is also the opportunity for a dividend, a tax-free dividend of up to £3,600 to be paid through the proceeds of the business's success to each and every employee. And if you also use some sort of tax advantage share scheme, then owners or employee owners can also accrue capital gains on the proceeds of that share ownership and indeed dividends. So how does this employee ownership trust work? So what the owner has to do is sell a controlling interest to an employee ownership trust. So that's anything over 50.1%. They then have to make sure that the trust, the the trust also then has to deliver benefits on an equal basis to everybody. So the trust beneficiaries are the employees, and that's every employee in the business. And when the benefits of that trust are distributed financially, they have to be distributed to everybody. So this isn't a mechanism for executive reward. You'd use some sort of share scheme alongside that if that's what you wanted to do. So as I said earlier, there's no capital gains tax to be paid for the seller. It must be a trading company, so that's really important. So, this is a limited company model, not an LLP model. And if you want to move from an LLP model to an employee ownership model, then you would need to transfer to a limited company. And that has been done by some businesses, particularly in the professional services sector. The EOT financial benefits must be for all employees on the same basis, as I said earlier. And currently there's this £3,600 tax-free per annum per person that can be paid. So there's a win-win for the employees and also for the owner if you move through the employee ownership trust route. I just wanted to say a few words now about what we do as the EOA. Simon mentioned he met us a few years ago. So we help businesses become employee owned. We do that through offering a service to people like Simon or anybody else who's interested in exploring it for their business, but we do it through campaigning as well. So we spend a lot of our time campaigning externally across the UK. And I just want to show you some of the things that we do. So this is a campaign called 1 Million Owners. We are running this in partnership with Co-ops UK, interestingly. So we're trying to increase the number of owners. Remember I said there was about 200,000 employee owners in the UK at the moment. Well, we want to increase that by 5-fold, and that's to encourage more and more businesses to look at employee ownership. And in campaigning for this, we end up with more opportunities to speak to audiences like you, to talk to the media, to engage with stakeholders. We also celebrate the best of employee ownership. So our campaign this year for EO Stories is about leaning into all of these employee-owned businesses and getting them to tell their stories of how this is working for them. Because there's nothing more inspiring, I think, for business owners, not to listen to somebody like me, but to listen to somebody like them. So if they can hear from an employee owner and a founder who's done this about why it's worked for them, how it feels to be the leader of a business like that, how it feels to be an employee owner in a business like that, and how it really impacts and changes the way that they feel about their employment and what that does then to the bottom line, is very, very powerful. And so we spend a lot of our time actually telling stories of good employee ownership so that other businesses can see and learn from their peers. And because of that, we spend a lot of time connecting businesses up as well. So members of ours will very often ask us for introductions to other businesses, either in their sector or the same size as them, or even in the same geography. And we can make those introductions. And that often helps to reassure business owners that actually they're taking a step that others have taken before them. They're not a pioneer. It's not risky. It's something that works for many other businesses just like theirs. And annually, we run a big celebration of employee ownership called Employee Ownership Day, or EO Day. It's the last Friday of June. This year, we've given it the title Better Together, and that's really in recognition of what we've seen in the sector over the last 18 months since COVID hit, really, and the fact that these businesses have, anecdotally at least, and we'll hopefully have some evidence later on, have proven themselves to be far more resilient and sustainable and successful, actually, during what has been a very difficult time for every single business in the UK. So that sort of gives you a roundup, hopefully in half an hour, of employee ownership. If you want any more information after we finish this morning, there's my email address. Also, one of my colleagues, Ollie Smith, who looks after membership, and there's our website there as well. And if you just want a conversation about, is this right for us? Could we explore it more, or for my clients, then give us a call or send us an email, or go on the website, because you'll find lots of information on the website, which hopefully you'll find really useful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I see Simon's come back on. So hopefully that has helped sort of debunk some of the myths around employee ownership and start to explore what it is.
And Deb, thank you. And Mark has popped those contact details in the chat box as well. So if you want to just click on those and it will take you to the appropriate place. Just membership subs at the moment, Deb, just in case people are wondering, how much is it to join at the moment?
Well, if you're a small business under 100 employees, it's £500, £499, because we always like to start a number with a 4, don't we, rather than a 5.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Thank you. And that's just as an annual membership, basically,
yes.
that comes with all the benefits. Brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank you.
all the benefits. Yeah.
So I've got some questions that have come in, Deb, and there's potentially going to be some specific ones
Okay.
which we'll have a play with. But Uma's asked if the trust has surplus profits after it has paid the owner for the shares and given all of the staff 3,600 each in dividends, what happens to the surplus profits? Can they be paid to the employees, and if so, how are they taxed?
Okay, good question. In fact, there's about 3 questions there.
Yeah.
So maybe what I'll just start with is how is this financed? So very often an owner will use deferred payments, which I think is what that person is intimating. So over a period of however many years it's agreed, the owner will get their payment through deferred payments. So the normal agreement there is that every year an amount will be paid back to the owner, providing that some basic levels of profit are made. So let's say the owner is getting £1 million a year for 5 years. That might be typical. Once the profits have been achieved, the owner is then paid out. And then if there's enough left to distribute a bonus to the employees, then that decision is taken. Now, the decision, who makes the decision, is the really interesting question here, because you've got the board of the company. So the limited company has got its board, and that's no different to any other business. So there'll be a set of directors. And then you've got the trust. And the trust is a legal entity of its own, so there will be trustees. Now, it's very typical that the owner, founder, and probably at least one other director of the business is also a trustee of the trust. But it's also typical that there will be an external independent trustee, and there'll probably be an employee trustee as well. And of course, the trust is a shareholder, and in this case, a majority shareholder. So what you would normally see is the board of directors making a recommendation to the trustees, or working with the trustees to agree what percentage of the profits are going to be distributed after paying off the owner's deferred payments. And it depends what the business is up to. So if the business is on some sort of growth trajectory, they may want to preserve some more of those profits for investment back in the business. So there is no set rule to this. And just to be clear, the 3,600 is not a limit. It's just that the first £3,600 is the only bit that's tax free. So it's also quite common, and we hear this frequently, businesses are distributing more than £3,600 in a profit share or a bonus or a dividend, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, it's a tax-free way of distributing some of the proceeds of the success of the business. But it's not limited at 3,600. It can be more than that. It's just that it's only the first 3,600 that is tax-free.
Brilliant. Thanks, Deb. And just to from an accountancy perspective, we're very used to employees, directors, shareholders, and that's kind of like a hierarchy. Whereas mentally, for me, when I'm working with employee ownership trust, it's actually a circle. So technically, the beneficiaries, which are the employees, appoint the trustees that appoints the directors that employs, and it goes round both directions. So in my scenarios, or in the scenarios where I'm working as a trustee, the director makes a recommendation to the trustees, and then the trustees accept it for and on behalf of the beneficiaries, basically, which are the employees. So if the employees don't like it, they can fire the trustees that then fire, and it just goes round and round in a circle in both directions. So it did originally take me a little bit to get my head around that.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful that we don't scare everybody away by it sounding as if every operational decision that the business takes has to be signed off by employees, because that absolutely is not the case. So these businesses structurally, for me, don't look that different to any other limited company. You've got a group of employees who have got responsibilities and are performance managed by a group of managers, and then there's a group of directors, and all of those same hierarchies still exist. That's how business works. There's clear targets, there's performance measures, there's accountabilities, and there's responsibilities, and people join the business knowing that all that is the case. What you have got here is, instead of the ownership being in the hands of one person or a couple of people, the majority of the ownership, if not all of the ownership, is in a trust. So it's just there's a different shareholder, and the trustees have still got the interest of both the beneficiaries and the business to consider when they're making decisions. And they're not involved in every single operational decision that takes place in the business. Yes, of course, they are involved in some of the more strategic decisions. Is there an acquisition going to happen or isn't there? Should we go into a new market or shouldn't we? There may be some of the sort of questions that trustees are asked about, but it's more likely that the employees as a group in some sort of employee council might get asked about that rather than the trustees. And so I think people shouldn't be scared that this sounds like it's some sort of utilitarian democracy where everybody is invited to have a view on everything, because it just wouldn't work. And every business that I showed on that earlier slide would tell you that's not how it works in their business.
No, very, very much so. As much as that circle exists, tactically and strategic, from the outside looking in, it looks just like a normal limited company
Absolutely.
Process. It's the governance of it that's different. And as I say, I know it took me a little bit to get my head round. So what scenario, who am I working for? Who am I acting for? And I think it's a joined up way of thinking for me. The other thing I'll add on to that, Umar, is that the profits can be used for the benefit of the beneficiaries. And I do know of people that they've used the money to improve the working conditions over and above what would be a normal accepted standard, and they can have days off. I know of a firm that introduced a gym. They installed a gym and a shower for exclusive use of the employees and things like that. So it's not necessarily a cash payment that needs to be made, as long as it's used for the benefit of the employee. So thank you. And then Andrew's asked, do you have any preferred tax advisors?
We have a group of members who are what we call supporter members. So in the membership, we help businesses that are exploring employee ownership, and we also support businesses that are employee owned. And we have this group of members that we call supporters. And some of those will be professional advisors, either legal or accountancy. And some of them are involved in communications and engagement as well. And so when a business is exploring employee ownership and they come to us at different stages. So they may come without any knowledge really at all, apart from they've heard about it and they're interested in exploring. In which case they may not have even spoken to their own advisor. Some of them come when they've done a lot of investigation themselves, and actually they're just looking to complete the circle and they want to talk to some other businesses that have become employee owned. So they come with their own advisors already lined up and helping them get to this point. But if businesses come and they have no advisor lined up, or they don't feel that their current advisor is going to be able to help them, they'll very often ask us, could you recommend somebody? In which case we would point them either at the website, because if you look on our website, you'll see the supporter page and you'll see the names of different professional service companies who are paying to be supporter members of ours, or we have a smaller group of businesses that we might advise them to if they're looking for legal advice. So our job really is to try and get every accountancy firm in the whole of the UK to a point of competence where they could advise their own clients on employee ownership, because that's how this sector is going to be mainstreamed. That's how it's going to grow, when every accountancy firm has got somebody in the firm who understands employee ownership, and not just understands it enough to answer questions when a client asks, but understands it enough to actually advise a client or recommend that a client looks at it as one of the options when they're thinking about succession. So be proactive about looking at it rather than just reactive when the client happens to mention it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deb. Paul, I've got your question. I will get to it in a minute. I just want to cover off something else that very often comes up. Chris asked, how can this route be made less costly in terms of legal and professional fees? So kind of building on that, who should we ask? How can we make it cheaper?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, first of all, there's always a cost in moving the ownership of your business on, whether it's a trade sale, whether it's a management buyout, whether it's employee ownership. So there's always a cost associated with this. So we're often asked, is it more expensive? Well, it shouldn't be that more expensive on the basis that actually there's only one set of legals involved here. You haven't got two sets of legals involved. It should take less time because, you're not in negotiation with a third party, and hence if the time is less, the cost should be less as well. I suspect we're into this, we're still in the early stages of employee ownership. Whilst there's maybe nearly 600 businesses in the UK that are employee owned, we're a long way off it becoming yet a mainstream product. And because of that, there's likely to be higher costs at the moment. But I would question if you are quoted much higher costs than what you might pay for a trade sale or a management buyout, because we're still going through a set of procedures that need to be paid for, but there is still a set of legal advice that's needed, and there's a set of accountancy advice that's needed. And some firms will seek to deliver both, and other firms will be happily work with an accountancy firm alongside the legal advisors. But I think even in the last 8 years since I've been involved in employee ownership, the costs have come down considerably since then. So it's like anything that's new, isn't it? In the early days, when there's a very few specialists around and people are probably learning about it, the costs are going to be slightly higher. But there are many more professional advisors around now who understand employee ownership, have done it before. So if you're not comfortable with the price you've been quoted, I would get you to shop around probably.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, and the other thing which you pointed out to me when we chatted last week is if you add in the agent's fees of disposal on a trade sale, both of the scenarios that I've been involved in where customers have gone over to an EOT, the actual fees, the combined fees, have been less than if they'd have done a normal trade sale. So yeah. Mentally, it's higher. It feels like you're paying more for the legals, but you're missing an invoice. And then the second thing, just to build on that, Deb. And this is another one when I speak to accountants about this, is they forget that effectively the buyer and the seller are the same person up until the point you sign on the dotted line when it goes over to. So you're effectively negotiating with yourself. So if you go for a trade sale, as we all know, that could go on for months and months and months, backwards and forwards. Plus you've got the time to find the buyer in the first place. Whereas an EOT, if you decided, but both of the ones that I've been involved in, one was 3 months and one was 5 months. So if you decide today, it could be done and dusted by October, and the time costs and the stress that's involved with that is obviously significantly less than if it was a trade sale.
Yeah, and I think, from my experience of, again, seeing lots of businesses do this, ultimately, one of the key things here is to make sure the communication with employees is right as well, because, I've never been through a business where it's been sold whilst I've been an employee, but I can imagine that is a very scary time for employees. And actually, in a time when you need to hang on to your best talent, you don't want to be losing people at that moment in time. So actually starting to talk to employees about the plans that you might have as a business owner is a positive thing, not a negative thing. And every business that I know that has gone through employee ownership, where they've started to talk to the employees at a point where they're comfortable that they're going to do it and they're confident they've got a plan, has been nothing other than positive. And it reassures employees that there is a plan in place to do this. I think a lot of owners hang on to their businesses to the very end because they're worried about upsetting employees or worrying them about a change of ownership. But actually the reverse can be true, particularly as owners get older into their 60s. Employees can be sat there looking and thinking, well, why haven't I heard anything about the next step of this business? I'm a bit concerned he or she hasn't got a plan. Actually, I might look somewhere else. Whereas if there is a plan, it actually creates a much more sustainable and confident future for the employees and arguably for some of the clients as well.
Definitely. Thank you. So to Paul's question then, what happens when an employee leaves? Are the shares bought from them or do they keep them?
Okay, good question, Paul. So when you use an employee ownership trust, there are no shares held in the hands of or in the name of individual employees. So the shares are all held in trust. So if the trust has 70% of the equity, let's say, of the business, and there are 100 employees, it's not like there's an equal split of the shares amongst those 100 people. There could be 1,000 employees. It makes no difference. The 70% of the equity is just held in trust. And as an employee, you are a beneficiary of that trust, whether that you are one of 100 or one of 1,000. So when you leave, you don't take anything with you. There's no change of anything for anybody to administer. If you are using a share scheme, like a tax advantaged all employee share scheme, like a SIP, I mentioned earlier, a share incentive plan, then actually when you leave an employment, then you are normally asked to sell your shares back to the business, because the whole concept of employee ownership is to keep the share ownership and the ownership amongst the current employees. So when somebody leaves, they are asked to sell their shares back to the business pays them for their current value, and the employee leaves and moves on. But under a trust structure, there is no selling at all. Somebody once described it to me as naked in and naked out. So when you join as an employee owner of a business that's owned by an EOT, you join with nothing, and when you become a beneficiary, you take the benefits of that status. And when you leave with nothing else, because you didn't own any shares. It's the trust that owns the shares. It's the trust that is the shareholder. You are a beneficiary. So hopefully that's explained that for you, Paul.
Deb, thank you. Sean's asked, company valuation. Is this an independent valuation needed to meet HMRC criteria, or can the incumbent advisor perform the task?
The advisor can normally perform the task, and providing they are using a recognised mechanism, so there isn't a massive overvaluation of the business, which is neither ethical nor practical for the business. Remember, most of these owners have an interest in the business in the longer term, because they will take deferred payments out of that business. But there is a point at which I'm sure the owner wants to move on, and the business needs them to move on as well. So it's typical that the owner in a deferred payment situation might be around for, say, 3 to 5 years. I've heard of some that have stayed around longer. I personally don't think that's very healthy for the business, for the owner to be lingering around for that amount of time. It just doesn't give the business the freedom it needs to operate. But the valuation, the valuation needs to be done. It doesn't have to be done independently, third hand. It can be done by the advisor. But be wary that this is not an opportunity to overvalue the business at any level.
No, definitely not. I've done a couple of valuations, and again, just to reconfirm, you're valuing the business for the buyer and the seller at the same time. But when you're actually speaking to the business, and again, I can think both of the examples, their payback periods, or the repayment of the loan was their biggest concern. Because obviously, if they're going to their team and saying, right, I'm selling this business and it's going to take you 10 years to pay it back before you get any benefit from it, it does completely defeat the whole object of the community coming together and working together, and the benefit for the employees. So as much as you've not got a third party to verify the valuation, it is definitely a collaboration to come up with the right number that's fair for everybody. And then also you've got to add in, obviously, if you're doing more than your 50%, your capital gains tax advantage and how you want to share that out as well.
Well, I think the word you just said there, which is really important, Simon, is fair. And this is still a commercial decision to make. The owner still needs to recognise value, because they've invested their heart and soul and probably their life in that business. But there is a level of fairness here. And, it's for business owners that have that mindset and want to leave their business in a safe pair of hands for the future, long-term sustainability, recognise those employees and get out of it a fair valuation on their terms. It does make complete sense. But, if there is a business owner who really just wants to exit in the quickest possible time, maximise the value, and doesn't really, really wants to maximise it beyond its true valuation, this probably isn't a route for them anyway. And there are different routes for those types of transactions.
Definitely. And it's for me, and I imagine that you find this as well, all of the ones that I've been involved in, it's about legacy. So I think when you was talking earlier about the fact that they didn't want to sell it to a conglomerate. The one of them that I've been involved in within the trustee document, there is a list of people that they can't sell the business to and they can't work with because he just doesn't want to work with a national chain and never want to sell it to a national chain. So all the way down to potentially saying that I want red vans, not blue vans going for and what to do.
I think that legacy thing is really important, but it's not just about that. I think, and I know for a lot of business owners, succession, it's a weighty responsibility. They really take it seriously. They just don't want to leave the business in a complete state and sell out really quickly. And it's interesting, the pandemic has caused a lot of business owners to start thinking about their own mortality, and that's why we've seen a massive increase in interest in the employee ownership model over the last year, partly stimulated by the tax as well, of course, but stimulated by owners seriously thinking about their future and how long do I want to be involved in the business. And anyway, if I had become ill through COVID or worse still, did I have a plan? What would have happened to the business and what would I have been leaving and where would my legacy have been? But also the bit that we've not spoken much about this morning is the growth potential that is associated with employee ownership. What it's possibly hard to imagine unless you've actually seen it in action, but once a group of employees are empowered with a sense of ownership and a real stake in the business, you just see what it does to their behaviour. You just see how they change the way they feel about the business, the discretional effort they put in, the innovation they show, the ideas that come out. And there are lots and lots and lots of these examples in our membership where businesses, once they become employee owned, in that year afterwards, they just experience a huge surge in growth. And that's either because costs become less, because people start to take responsibility for silly things like turning out the lights, procuring the right products at the right price, or even for sales inquiries. But you see businesses really grow and prosper in that immediate aftermath of employee ownership, which of course actually helps the owner to exit quicker because the returns can be paid back to them more speedily. And for a lot of owners, I think what they sit and think is, wow, why didn't this happen when I was in charge? Why wasn't the business performing quite as well? And it's all about unleashing the potential of people in the business. And we did a report a couple of years ago called the Ownership Effect Report, and or the inquiry was the Ownership Effect Inquiry, and the report at the end was called the Ownership Dividend. And the name was chosen really carefully. This mechanism for handing over ownership really does deliver a dividend for the owner and for the employees and for the business.
Thank you. It's got 4 minutes. I've got 2 questions I just want to touch on. If anybody else has got any other questions, you pop them on the Q&A box. I will gladly ask. I've got 2 questions that I just want to touch base on. In a traditional SME, owners take salary and dividends. Is this still viable in employee ownership?
Well, if the owner has an ownership stake in terms of shares, then yes, they will take dividends in the same way, providing the business is reporting a profit. Many owners that we've seen, they transition out of the business. So they will very often, they'll have their deferred payments coming through on a regular basis. They may still be taking some sort of salary out of the business for the time that they work in the business. And if they retain some of the ownership stake themselves, which some of them do for various different reasons, then of course that would attract dividends if dividends are paid, but they'll be paid equally to everybody. So the trust would attract dividends and any other shareholders would attract dividends as well.
Thank you. And then the last question, and I'll I don't know whether you'll be able to answer this, Deb, but I'll throw it out there. Obviously,
I'll give it a try.
Well, lots of the activity pre-budget with employee ownership was around the rumour about capital gains tax changing and the rates changing and entrepreneurial relief, or whatever it's called these days, being removed. Do you have any indication at all that the tax benefit of employee ownership trusts will change in the near future?
So we did have lots of concerns, as you probably are alluding to. So the Office for Tax Simplification was asked to do a review of CGT last year by the Chancellor. That report and that review was submitted, and as as of today, the government has not yet responded to that report, but we do expect a response at some point. Up until quite recently, we were probably more concerned about the potential impact on the EOT and CGT. But in recent weeks, we've become less worried because we've had some very strong reassurances from government of their commitment to employee ownership and their commitment to the EOT. And the EOT works partly because it delivers the CGT relief, which enables owners to actually go through the transaction in the first place and to deliver that sustainability of business. And I think the government recognised that employee ownership is delivering for the UK exactly what the UK needs right now, which is resilient, sustainable businesses which are sharing wealth more widely. So because of that, I feel very reassured that we're in a safe place now with both the EOT and the CGT allowance.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I always, whenever anybody talks to me about political things like that, I always think, how would it be in the Sun or the Mirror newspaper? So, and you could just see the headlines: government bans employees from owning businesses and stuff like that. And I don't think that would politically, it would go down, very well. But brilliant. That's some fantastic reassurance there, Deb. So that just leaves me at 10:29 to say thank you, Deb, for coming along today and for sharing. Mark's popped the contact details in the chat box, so if you would like to catch up with Deb, or what was the gentleman's name of Ollie, was it?
Ollie Smith.
Brilliant. Yeah. You catch up with Ollie and have a conversation. For me, and again, I said this at the beginning of the conversation today, that 45 minutes that I spent with Deb 4 or 5 years ago, it just expanded my mind around what is possible and all the different things that we could do in order to engage our team and get ownership of our team. So thank you, Deb, for coming along today, and to thank you to everybody in the community that's come along and for asking questions. As I always say, it's the questions that you ask that make these conversations unique. So thank you very much. So thank you, Deb, and goodbye. Thanks, for now. Simon. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching this video with Deb Oxley from the Employee Ownership Association. I am sure you will have found it as interesting as what I did. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below this video and we will gladly answer them. Please remember to like the video and also subscribe to the channel so you get notified the next time we upload a video for you. On the bottom of the screen there, down there somewhere, you will see the next videos that we suggest in order to inspire, challenge, and support you to run a better accountancy practice.